The wedding ring came off on a Sunday. Not because of a fight, not because of tears or lawyers or dramatic confrontations in hallways, because Nadia was washing dishes alone, again, at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night, and she looked down at her hand in the soapy water and thought, with a calm that frightened her more than any anger ever had, "I have been waiting for my life to begin for 7 years." She dried her hands, she placed the ring on the counter beside the dish soap, and she did not put it back. Nadia had always been the patient one. Her mother said it like a compliment. Nadia is so patient, so steady, so good. And Nadia had accepted it the way you accept a name given to you before you're old enough to choose your own. Patient, steady, good. She wore these words like a coat that had never quite fitted, that she had simply stopped noticing was uncomfortable. She had married Aryan at 28. He was brilliant and restless and magnetic in the way of people who were always slightly more interested in the next room than the one they're standing in. She had loved this about him once, the energy of him, the sense that being near him meant being near something important about to happen. She had not realized until several years had quietly passed that she had been standing near the door of that important thing for their entire marriage, and it had never once opened for her. Aryan was not cruel. That was the thing she could never make anyone fully understand. He was not a villain. He did not shout or demean or threaten. He simply occupied. He occupied the conversation, the plans, the future. His career was the urgent one. His stress was the real stress. His dreams had coordinates and timelines. Hers were referred to, always gently, always with a smile, as Nadia's little ideas. She had wanted to study architecture. She had the acceptance letter, the scholarship, the hunger for it. Aryan had said, not forbidding, never forbidding, just wondering aloud whether the timing was right, whether the commitment was realistic, whether perhaps she might want to wait until they were more settled. She had waited. They never became more settled. The letter went unanswered, and she had told herself it was a choice she had made freely. She had wanted to move to a city with better opportunities. Aryan had a reason to stay. She had wanted a dog. The apartment wasn't right. She had wanted simply to be asked, "How are you? What do you need? What do you dream about at 3 in the morning?" But Aryan asked about logistics, about schedules, about whether she had remembered to book the car service. She had remembered. She always remembered. The affair, when she discovered it, was almost a relief in its clarity. It was not dramatic. There was no lipstick on a collar, no whispered phone call she accidentally overheard. It was an email, open on the shared laptop, from a woman named Rena, warm and specific and full of the kind of intimate detail that does not exist between two people who are only colleagues. Nadia read it once, closed the laptop, made herself a cup of tea. She sat at the kitchen table and realized she was not surprised. That was the part that broke her, not the betrayal itself, but her own lack of shock. Some part of her had known, or had known something, for long enough that the confirmation landed not like a bomb, but like a full stop at the end of a sentence she had been reading for years. She thought about the architecture letter, the city they had never moved to, the dog they had never got, the 1,000 small surrenders she had made in the name of a partnership that had, apparently, been conducting its own separate life entirely. She did not confront him that night. She waited, old habit, until the weekend when they were both home and the morning was unhurried. She told him what she had seen. He did not deny it. He looked, she thought, almost relieved himself, the way people look when a thing they have been carrying is finally put down. They spoke for a long time, quietly, without shouting, with the particular exhausted civility of two people who have stopped being enemies and are not sure they were ever really partners. When he left, Nadia stood at the kitchen window for a long time. Then she opened her laptop, found the website of the architecture school, and looked up whether they accepted mature students. They did. She wrote that down in a notebook, the first thing she had written down for herself in 7 years. It is not too late. It was never too late. I was just waiting in the wrong place. The studio apartment was on the fourth floor of a building that smelled of old wood and someone else's cooking, and Nadia found it, on the first morning, to be the most honest place she had ever lived. No performance required, no listening for the sound of a key in the lock and arranging her face accordingly, just four walls, a window that faced east, and the extraordinary luxury of silence that belonged to her. She enrolled in the architecture program on a Tuesday, told her mother on Wednesday, survived the phone call on Thursday. By Friday, she had bought a new sketchbook, large, spiral-bound, completely empty, and sat at her east-facing window and drew the view for 2 hours, simply because she wanted to. She had forgotten what wanting felt like. Not needing, not managing, not accommodating, wanting. The distinction arrived like a key turning in a lock she had not known was there. The program was harder than she expected, and she was grateful for every difficult hour of it. Her classmates were younger, mostly, fresh-faced and technically fluent in software she had to learn from scratch. She made mistakes in front of them and discovered that mistakes, witnessed by people who are not keeping score, are simply information. She stayed late in the studio. She asked questions without apology. She turned in work she was proud of and work she was embarrassed by, and learned to tell the difference. There was a professor named Dr. OSA, small, precise, with the particular patience of someone who has watched many students discover themselves and knows better than to rush the process. He looked at her first major project and said simply, "There is a person in here. Keep going." She kept going. She also, quietly and without announcement, began therapy. She had resisted it for years. Arian had called it self-indulgent, and she had absorbed this opinion the way she had absorbed so many of his, without examining whether she agreed. Sitting across from her therapist, a calm woman named Dr. Farida, who had a plant on her windowsill that was inexplicably thriving, Nadia began to excavate. What she found beneath the patience and the steadiness and the goodness was not emptiness. That was what she had feared, that if she looked closely enough, she would find that she had given away so much of herself, there was nothing original remaining. What she found instead was a woman who had been interrupted, not destroyed, not hollowed out, simply interrupted, mid-sentence, and waiting, with extraordinary, terrible patience, to finish the thought. She began finishing thoughts. She called her oldest friend, Amara, who had been kept at careful distance during the marriage because Arian had found her a lot, and Nadia had made herself smaller to fit his comfort. Amara answered on the second ring, and when Nadia said, "I have been an absent friend and I am sorry," Amara said, "I know, I waited. Tell me everything." They talked for 4 hours. She got the dog, a ridiculous, enormous, deeply inconvenient rescue named Ptolemy, who ate one of her sketchbooks in the first week and looked entirely unrepentant about it. She loved him with a fierceness that surprised her, the uncomplicated love of a creature who needed her, and showed it without strategy. It was walking Ptolemy one evening through the small park near her building that she met James. He was sitting on a bench reading, which she noticed first because it was raining lightly, and he had simply opened his jacket over the book rather than leaving, which she found either very committed or very strange. Ptolemy, with the social confidence of a dog who has never experienced rejection, walked directly to him and placed his enormous head on the man's knee. "I'm so sorry," Nadia said, pulling the lead. The man looked up. He had a calm, open face and the unhurried expression of someone who had nowhere more important to be. "Don't be," he said. "I was hoping for an excuse to stop." "What are you reading?" He showed her the cover. It was a book on urban architectural theory that she had, by coincidence, just been assigned in her program. She sat down on the bench. The rain continued. Neither of them suggested moving. A year after the ring came off on a Sunday, Nadia stood in front of her studio cohort and presented her final major project, a community center designed for an underserved neighborhood built around the concept of interrupted spaces, rooms designed not for efficiency, but for the specific human need to pause, to gather oneself, to begin again. Dr. Osei sat in the front row. When she finished, he nodded once, the slow, certain nod of someone whose faith has been confirmed rather than surprised. The project won the program's annual design award. She called her mother. Her mother cried. Nadia, to her own surprise, did not need to comfort her. James came to the presentation. He stood at the back of the room because he had arrived late, and she saw him there when she looked up mid-explanation and lost her sentence for exactly 1 second before finding it again. Afterward, he brought her flowers that he had clearly bought from the petrol station across the street and made no attempt to pretend otherwise, which was one of the 17 specific things she had by now identified as reasons she loved him. Their relationship had built itself the way good structures do, not quickly, not impressively, but correctly. Foundation first, attention to what was underneath before anything visible was raised. James was an urban planner, which meant they argued productively about cities and agreed passionately about people, which Nadia had come to understand was the ideal ratio. He had his own history, a previous relationship that had ended with mutual recognition rather than betrayal, a period of his own recalibration, his own lessons learned in the particular school of starting over. He did not need her to be patient. He did not need her to be steady. He did not call her ideas little. One evening, sitting at her east-facing window, with Ptolemy asleep across both their feet, James said, "Can I tell you what I noticed about you the first time we talked?" She waited, but differently now. Not the old waiting, the waiting of someone managing their hope downward, the waiting of someone genuinely curious. "You finished every sentence," he said, "even the hard ones. You didn't trail off or redirect or soften, you just finished them. I'd never met anyone who did that, and I didn't know until that moment that I'd been waiting to." Nadia looked at him for a long time. She thought about the architecture letter she had not answered, the city she had not moved to, the dog she had waited 7 years to get, who was currently crushing her left foot and snoring. She thought about the ring beside the dish soap, and the east-facing window, and the sketchbook Ptolemy had eaten, and Amara who had waited and said, "Tell me everything," and the community center built for people who needed a place to pause and begin again. She thought about how she had designed that building for others and had not realized until this exact moment that she had also been designing it for herself. "I spent 7 years not finishing sentences," she said quietly. "I know," said James. "I can tell, because now you can't stop." She laughed, the full, unguarded kind, the kind she had not rationed or considered before releasing. Ptolemy lifted his head at the sound, decided it was not a threat, and went back to sleep. Outside the east-facing window, the city moved in its ordinary, indifferent, beautiful way. Nadia did not need it to notice her. She had stopped waiting for things to notice her. She was too busy, finally, building. Her story did not end. It finally started.